Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation. The presentation of how can off-reserve Indigenous education meet the needs of Indigenous students. My name is Rob Currie and I'm an executive in residence with the Johnson Shrayama Graduate School of Public Policy. And I am most pleased and honored to be your moderator for today's session. A little bit about my background. Over a 38-year period, I've had the opportunity to work within the education sector, most recently serving as a deputy minister within the Ministry of Education. And before that, working with Regina Catholic Schools, where my last 8 years were as serving as a director of education. And many years before that, I started as a classroom teacher in the middle years area, and I had the opportunity to work with students and obtain a love of education and providing the best possible education for students. This topic is of significant interest to me because of the local, provincial, and I would say national components that we have before us in serving the needs of our Indigenous students. And as I've said, I'm most honored and privileged to be able to moderate today's event. Today's lecture is organized by the Johnson Shrayama Graduate School of Public Policy. And it is Johnson Shrayama is a national hub for advanced study and research in public policy administration. We are a partnership between the University of Regina and the University of Saskatchewan that was based on the spirit of cooperation and collaboration that defines Saskatchewan. Since our inception in 2007, we have swiftly become one of Canada's leading policy schools for educating graduate students and public servants interested in and devoted to advancing public value. And at this time, I would like to acknowledge that while today's event is taking place online, Johnson Shrayama Graduate School's physical homes are located on Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territories, the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the traditional homeland of the Métis. And in recognizing these territories, I would also like to recognize that I am joining today from Canmore, Alberta, which is located within Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. And I acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, with the historical Northwest Métis homeland. So we are glad that all of you have taken some time to join us today from across Turtle Island and make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those on whose territory we reside or are visiting. So as I've mentioned earlier, and as you know because of the previous information communicated to you, today we will be discussing and focusing on exploring the issues, challenges, and priorities to ensure an off-reserve education system that meets the needs of Indigenous students. We have a wonderful panel to spend time with us today to share their insights and to help us guide the conversation and respond to the situations and questions that you will pose. So how do we run this event smoothly? Well, we would ask that attendees, to help with bandwidth, stay muted and turn off their video during the presentation portion of the event. Feel free to turn your videos on for any of the questions and answer sections that we will be having throughout today's gathering. And the format for today's event is as follows. Following my introductory remarks, our panelists will provide a brief introduction, and then I will pose some prepared questions. And following this, we'll open it up to the audience for questions and answers for the remaining time. At all times, if you have a question that comes to mind that you would like to ensure gets considered, I'd ask you to please use the Zoom's chat function and send that to either me, Rob Currie, or to to Karen as well, and we will list those, and we hope to get through all of our questions today. And if you have any logistical questions during today's event, please do not hesitate to send a message to Karen Jaster-LaForge via Zoom's chat or email her at jsgs.events@uofr.ca. and you will be able to find Karen's contact information in the chat. And please note that with all of our public lectures, the presentation is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the JSGS website at a later date. So long-winded, I realize, but now that the logistics are out of the way, I'm very pleased to introduce today's panelists in the order that they will present. And I will introduce each panelist, read a little bit about them from their bio, and then invite each panelist to speak briefly about an education system that would meet the needs of Indigenous students. And then we'll begin posing questions to them and gather and glean from their insights. So to begin, I'd like to introduce Ceane Dusyk. Ceane, on our screen here, is a proud Métis from Regina, Saskatchewan. He completed his studies at the University of Saskatchewan Urban Teachers Program, SUNTEP, in 2005. And this program awoke his passion for teaching and the awareness of the need for positive cultural understanding and representation in the school system. Ceane started his teaching career teaching kindergarten and is currently an Indigenous advocate in the Regina Public School Division's high schools. His position in the Regina Public School Division is to support all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit students to help ensure smooth transitions through the high school and to increase graduation rates. And with that, I'd like to welcome Ceane.
Thank you for that introduction. Hello, everybody. As you mentioned, I've been teaching in the Regina Public School systems for almost 15 years now. And I started my career teaching kindergarten, and I have slowly worked my way up all the way into high school. So I have taught and had experience almost every grade all the way up into high school. Kindergarten was a great, and I have many stories of working with families in the community as a kindergarten teacher up into high school, and at the moment being in high school is a great place. But my job as an Indigenous advocate is near and dear to my heart and something I'm very passionate about currently. Throughout my career, culture has been SUNTEP. Actually, I'll start with SUNTEP. SUNTEP was a place that cultivated my passion for bringing the importance of bringing culture into our school systems. And I've carried that with me even from starting in kindergarten, but all throughout my career. And from being a kindergarten teacher to an Indigenous studies teacher to a transitions teacher, and now an advocate. But being an advocate at this point in time has offered great opportunities, even more so, to communicate with families and really help support how important it is to have representation of culture in the school and for our families. How I became the advocate was, as I've said, I've had many different roles throughout my career, and each role that I have taken, have had the opportunity to be a part of with Regina Public was an initiative through them to help support our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students. And as an advocate, this position was created to help not only increase graduation rates, but Regina Public saw the need for more supports in our communities to help ensure that those graduation rates would increase. So by having most of our schools in our division, high schools, have an advocate just like me. We all approach it in our own ways, but one of the ways I approach it is by creating relationships within our community with the students, with their families, to help support them and help kind of build that bridge between school and the community again. And it's been a love of mine. I've been doing it for 8 years now, almost 8 years now. and getting to know and building those relationships with those families in the community, I have learned a lot over the years about what our students are wanting, what our families are wanting, and how to further support them. So today I'm looking forward to hearing some of the questions and having the opportunity to share some of my experience about what our youth and community are asking for, and hopefully maybe hear some others on the panel talk about some of the same strategies we can do to help make our communities, our Indigenous communities, even more successful.
Thank you, Ceane. We look forward to your further comments. I'd also like to introduce our next panelist, Jory Kashane. Jory, give a wave there if you wouldn't mind, please, Jory. Thank you. Jory is an Anishinaabe woman from the Yellow Quill First Nation. Jory began her teaching career 14 years ago as the art teacher at Scott Collegiate in North Central Regina. And over the years, she has taught many subjects including the Paul Martin Entrepreneurship Program. In her time as a teacher, Jory became increasingly aware of the need for more mental health support in her school, which led her to receive her master's in educational psychology from the University of Regina. Jory is very passionate about her work with Indigenous youth and continues to learn and grow in the areas of trauma therapy and Indigenous education. Welcome, Jory.
Hi, thanks, Rob. Thanks everyone for joining us today on this great talk. Currently, I am still at Scott Collegiate. I've been here for 14 years. I actually started as a grade 7 teacher with Regina Public Schools, but I only did that for 1 year, and then I was lucky enough to get my dream position, which was art teacher at Scott Collegiate. I taught art for a number of years, and about 5 years ago, I started in guidance counseling here at the school as well at Scott Collegiate. Though I haven't moved around very much, I've really honed in my expertise and experience in urban Indigenous education here at the school, building relationships, learning new skills in order to meet the needs of our students, which are varied and do change student to student. Thanks again for having me, and thanks everyone else, Mr. Martin and Ceane, for also joining me in this day. And yeah, and I look forward to talking more about my experiences.
Thank you, Jory, and welcome. I'd now like to introduce the Right Honourable Paul Martin. The Right Honourable Paul Martin was a Prime Minister of Canada from 2003 to 2006. And as Prime Minister, Mr. Martin set in place a 10-year plan to improve healthcare and reduce wait times. He also signed agreements with the provinces and territories to establish the first national early learning and childcare program. Under Mr. Martin's leadership, following an 18-month consultation process involving Canada's provinces, territories, First Nations, the Métis Nation, and Inuit leaders, the federal government reached an historic consensus with the 2005 Kelowna Accord to eliminate funding gaps in health, education, housing, and clean water for Indigenous people. In 2008, along with his family, he founded the Martin Family Initiative, a charitable organization committed to improving education, health, and the overall well-being of Indigenous people in Canada. And since its inception, the Martin Family Initiative has sought to walk the path with Indigenous people as they define their priorities and goals, bridging the gap between needs and available resources. And to this end, the Martin Family Initiative gathers the most relevant expertise coupled with Indigenous-based knowledge to co-develop, support, and implement innovative programming and networks. Welcome, Mr. Martin. I think you're on mute there. There we are. And we still have you on mute. There we
Am I
go.
still on? Okay.
All good.
Well, am I still on mute? No.
You're fine.
Well, you were a very courageous man. Mostly in my career, a lot of people have tried to keep me on mute. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to it, and I certainly, when I listened to the first two panelists, I can understand why, and listen to your remarks. Let me say that you talked about what our foundation is doing. We have a number of areas in which we have focused, and I would hope at a chance get a chance to talk about them. One of them is our literacy course, based on if you can't read or write by the end of grade 3, normally you get passed on, and of course, as that's a clear indication that you're going to drop out of school, and so the literacy course is crucial. The other program is one that a number of you may know, which is the early years. The most important years in your life are the years 0 to 5. That's essentially when you develop resilience, when you understand, and a lot of the things that are so important to you later in life are developed. And so we have the early years program, which is right across the country, and I would like to talk about it. But the one that I really want to focus on is the one that is, I think, not paid sufficient attention, and that is our business course. And the reason for that is, when you look at it, the fact is that the youngest and fastest growing segment of the Canadian population are, in fact, Indigenous kids, Indigenous students. And business is incredibly important. And I really would like to deal with that, perhaps on the basis that the literacy course is well known. The early years, I think, are recognized, the importance of those years. But I really do believe that the business community, governments, and to be frank, Indigenous people don't really pay enough attention to the importance of the Indigenous people in this country playing a much bigger role in terms of the development of the Canadian economy. And I'd like to talk about that.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. So I'm going to ask a question here that's very open-ended and very broad, but as we begin to respond and provide some content, we'll narrow it down into specifics as we go forward. So as we know, we have more and more students who are moving off reserve into non-reserve education systems and structures. We look to help all students in our education systems. Let's talk today about our Indigenous students as we are. So how do we help, given your experiences, the three of you, how do we help our Indigenous students succeed and be successful? And I call upon one of you. Jory, I see you smiling. Would you mind just starting us off? Given your experiences, how would you help your Indigenous students succeed?
The first thing that comes to mind is, well, there's a lot, but the first thing that comes to mind is we need to help remove some of the barriers that are keeping students from accessing education in the city. Food security, housing security, transportation, mental health supports, cultural programming, that the healing types of things done within our cultures, access to those things. That would be a big one. The next thing that I think about is once kids get into the building, they're fed, they've slept somewhat, they have somewhere, somewhere kind of sort of stable to come from. Once they get into our building, then it's about relationship building. It becomes about the adults and the teachers in the building and how we work with the youth when they're in our presence. And so I'll talk further later a bit about trauma-informed practices, being aware of the way that we show up to work, being aware in the ways in which we connect with students one-on-one and in groups, and continually seeking to improve our pedagogy and seeking to improve our just the way that we do business within the school setting. Incorporating more culture, incorporating Indigenous language classes, incorporating really good programs like the IET program that Mr. Martin was just talking about. And also bringing in more Indigenous community members into the building as well.
Jory, thank you. You've created a link to one of the programs that Mr. Martin has referenced, and maybe we'll come, Mr. Martin, if you wouldn't mind speaking to that when it comes to you, but and referencing a little bit more. Ceane, any thoughts from you? How do we help our Indigenous students succeed?
I mean, there is a big question. I was smiling, and Jory said too, because there's so many things that come to mind. Working with the youth and in the community over the years, there's been a resounding voice from them that that they've been wanting. And one of the things that I see is, I mean, all the things that Jory has said, but also that is that relationship piece and how important that is. Our kids wanting to be they wanted to see themselves in the buildings that they are to be feel comfortable in and feel safe in. I mean, providing food and all those things, but having individuals, not just the posters and the curriculum, which is all very important and being taught, but having individuals in the building that they identify with and feel comfortable with in that setting. We all need a person in our workspaces, and school is their workspace for a good portion of the first few years of their life, right? So going to the place where there is a person there that they can identify with, feel safe with, and talk with is what they have voiced that is crucial for them. Having advocates is a start. The elders program, which we do have elders and knowledge keepers in the building. But a lot of our kids are searching for that cultural component, that connection to their culture, and being able to find someone to talk to and find a comfort level within the school is so important to also keep them coming back to the school. Being able to provide all these things, which we're trying our best to, ensures that they'll, despite what's going on in their lives at the moment, that they will continue to show up through our doors every day and feel safe to ask for help, or just sit down and ask questions to ensure that they'll stay. And that's really what our focus is. Even me as an advocate, that is one of the supports I try to provide, is just to create those relationships so that our students and our families feels that they can call our institution, our schools, and with whatever the needs that we can help to ensure that their education can continue at a comfort level that they need.
Thank you, Ceane. Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go back to Jory if I might, but I'm going to rely on you. You're going to give me a shot on the business course at some point this morning. The fact of the matter, I think I would ask Jory really a question. Cindy Blackstock, whom we all know, Cindy Blackstock has said that one of the biggest problems that so many Indigenous people face is a problematic childhood. And we all know that a childhood which is interrupted by welfare and that kind of thing is a childhood which has a lot of problem, which is the whole purpose behind the early years. One of the things that people seem to neglect is that in community after community, there were literally thousands of children who were well raised, required no welfare officers because their mothers knew exactly how to handle it. And I have never been a mother, but I've certainly talked to my wife, and I've talked to a number of mothers who basically say that, you know, you guys just don't know how important being a mother is and what it's involved. And at times you need some help. And so what we did is we reached into a number of communities, and we reached in to simply say, successful mothers, can you help develop essentially a program that will help new mothers who've never had anybody to guide them and they to do so. And that's what's happened. That's what our early years program is. It is really a question of home visitors who are mothers who have successfully raised their children, who've got a lot of experience, who then within the community essentially provide help to new mothers. So in other words, it's experience helping inexperience. And it's been a huge success. And Jory, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, I'm not, is everyone able to hear? Oh, there we go. I'm not familiar with the program too much, Mr. Martin, but I do know that investment in mothers across the board is a good investment for sure. And I know that there has been some work done in other Indigenous communities throughout the world where programs have invested in mothers. And when you empower a woman, you empower generations of people. So, I mean, I think that's amazing and awesome. We do have a daycare here at the school. There is programming that is done pre-COVID, hopefully soon as well, with the young teens here. Yeah, I mean, if a mother is able to access her own supports and helps, then she is more accessible to her children's needs. If you have a mother who is unable to access supports and helps for many different reasons, then she is less accessible, right, for her family. We have a lot of students who come into our doors that do not have mothers who are accessible necessarily, whether it be because of addictions, death, those types of situations. They might have surrogate mothers, grandmothers, aunties, cousins, neighbors, whatever, that step in to play that role. And to some extent, you know, we also play that role in the building as teachers and educators. Dusyk's like the dad around here, Ceane. He's like everybody's dad. And the kids really access him like that. Like they will go and get help from him in the ways that they need help. So it's quite good that way. Yeah, does that answer your question, Mr.
Yes,
Martin?
yes, it does. And what we're seeing with this program is more and more exactly what you said, and that is that we got it going, but now it is really being taken over by mothers in the community who are saying, we want to do this, we understand this, and I think that it is a wonderful thing. We did our first program in Alberta at Muskogee. In Alberta, and then not long after that, the Yukon called us and said, we want the program. And we went up and they just took it over. And I've been to spend a number, and now it's spreading throughout the north, Nunavut, and all of these places. And it is a wonderful thing to see. And I think that also what it says is if people from the outside are prepared to help, but also prepared to say, okay, when the community is prepared to take it over, we've got to let the community do that. You would be amazed at how much success that you can have. And that's what we're seeing.
So Mr. Martin and Jory, I want to springboard off of that. And Mr. Martin, it's showing through your intense belief and support of early learning and childcare programming, and you both referenced that right here. Let's springboard to the other end of the education spectrum towards high school. And I'm going to ask you, Mr. Martin, if you wouldn't mind sharing some insights and some thoughts on the business classes and the business courses that would provide an opportunity for students.
Well, given that I actually begged you to ask me that question, that's very good. that is very good of you. The Indigenous youth are the youngest body in Canada. Fundamentally, there are two issues. The young Indigenous youth are the largest segment of their population in the country, and are growing at a faster rate than any other group of people in this country. So understand the huge importance of Indigenous youth as we look ahead. It's getting bigger and bigger, being just simply the sheer numbers that are there. If you take a look at the high schools across the country and everything else, you will see that there are some business courses, but the high schools have walked away from business courses much more than they did, for instance, when I was in high school, 4 centuries ago. And so but the issue really is this. If you have the youngest and the fastest growing segment of your population are Indigenous youth, surely to heaven, they should be given as much of an insight into what the business world is all about, because they are going to play an incredibly important role in that business world. And then if you look at schools across the country, primarily schools, the schools that you're talking about, that is to say, the schools outside of the reserve, you will find almost no interest in teaching business, period, to the students, which is, it may be that somebody whose father goes off or mother goes off to the office every day doesn't need it, but I doubt that. I would think they do need it. But nonetheless, but to not teach business to the youngest and fastest growing segment of our population makes no sense whatsoever. Think what that means for 15 and 20 years from now. I'll give the best example of what I'm talking about is we all understand, we all know about what happened at Clearwater. Clearwater is the largest seafood company in Canada. And what happened was Chief Terry Paul, who was the head of one of the major Mi'kmaq communities in Nova Scotia, bought control of the largest seafood company in the country. This was an amazing acquisition, and but one of the things that's happened is that Chief Terry Paul, having done that, was asked, well, what does this mean for the Mi'kmaq young people? And he said, well, I'm going to want over time for the management of this company to be our young people. And that's what he should have said, and that's what has to happen. We cannot, if this is the youngest and the fastest growing segment of our population, just simply leave Indigenous young men and young women aside. We've got to recognize that for themselves, it's very important. It's all the moral thing to do to say that Indigenous young people should get every opportunity that every other Canadian does. But the fact of the matter is, if you were not prepared to do that, well, then you'd better understand that if Indigenous young people do not play a determining role in the Canadian economy as time develops, we're not going to make it. You cannot make it without. Do you think about this? People are very happy about this Clearwater takeover. Oh, what a wonderful thing. What a wonderful thing it was. And we can do next. I'm going to tell you who's going to do the next takeover of something like that. I can tell you who are next going to make the investments. They're young Indigenous people who today are in primary school or people who are in high school. And if we don't make sure that they have the skills that are required the Canadian economy is going to miss the boat. And so that's why we created a business course. It's a business course that is essentially done by Indigenous entrepreneurs, Indigenous teachers, and an awful lot of work from outside. We created textbooks that are apply only to the Indigenous young, and to the point that we now get requests across the country, across the world. The Australians, New Zealanders are asking for our textbooks. So the point that I would make is what we now have to recognize as Canadians, that we have arrived at a crucial point. The idea that we can build an economy without the complete involvement of the Indigenous people is gone, because the Indigenous people are the youngest and the fastest growing members of our society. And what we have to do is to understand that the more that they become educated in business, the stronger business we will have. As a result of this, we've developed a course. It is very, very successful. We're in a number of schools in Saskatchewan, but not enough. We're in some 40 schools across the country. We should be in 3 times that number. And that's what that really means, is that provincial governments and the federal government are going to have to recognize that this has to be funded. We developed the whole project. We funded it, we developed how to do it, but we don't supply the teachers. And so the teachers have got to be provided. And I can tell you this, and then on this I will close. If the Indigenous youth are given access to business courses which tell them that they can run things, they are going to run them. I'll just give you an example of what I mean. That Chief Terrence Paul, when he bought Clearwater, somebody said, and I mentioned this to you, well, what about the young people? Are they going to do it? And he said, yes. But the fact is, they aren't trained today. So I need them trained when the time comes. And what I'm really saying is, if I was looking at the education system, there are a lot of things that are very, very important. But the one that we must remember is that the Canadian economy of the next decade is going to depend on young Indigenous men and women. And they've got to be given the tools to do the job.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. I just want to remind our viewers and our attendees, if you have any questions, please feel free to pose them in the chat to me or to Karen at JSGS, and we will take those and we will look to have our panelists respond to them. And so please feel free to do that, and we will attempt to get through all questions before our 1:30 time off. So thanks very much in advance if you have any questions or comments you'd like to share. Jory, I'd like to come back to you in a second and then turn it over to Ceane as well. So Mr. Martin has shared what we can do, I would suggest, locally, provincially, and nationally to address success of our Indigenous students in school, give them the business tools, give them the opportunities, see a future ahead. In your local context, that being in Regina at your respective sites, what are you seeing that would be of benefit? And Jory, you've mentioned a number of things, trauma-informed practices. Ceane, you mentioned relationship building, that type of thing. What are you seeing that would be of need and of benefit specifically, if you can touch upon that you see stands up right away? We need this in order to move our students forward, provide for them. Jory, do you have some insights? And then we'll move over to Ceane.
Yeah, actually, Ceane, I don't know if you want to get in on this with me. Ceane and I work in the same school, and he's my neighbor. So we talk quite a bit about the things that we see in the school and what we need and stuff like that. Yeah, go ahead.
I know one of the things that we've seeing that our students wanting is like when we talk about having that representation of individuals that they can relate to within the building. It is bringing in, having access to those resources and those people in the building have opened doors to other things that our students can relate. So even like our pathways at our school, doing our specific pathways that help develop some of those skills, whether it's leadership skills, our cooking skills, some of the, as you said, entrepreneurship type things. Those are great, and they are helping our students with the certificates and kind of leading them down a path of what their interests are. But then also being able to introduce them to individuals within the community that are also being successful that they identify with, whether it's restaurant owners, leaders in the community at the university level, like even like having presenters that come in through these pathways that talk about things that are happening at the U of R, at Sunset Regina, entrepreneurs that are in the community that are trying to get their businesses going, that students can sit down and be like, hey, that they can relate to and say, I can do that. And where do I start? And we're hoping that within our building that we have started that pathway, but we're always looking for new ways and more ideas to even help further that education and experiences for our students.
Yeah, I would pretty much echo exactly what Ceane says. Mentors are hugely important in students seeing themselves in places that they maybe wouldn't normally see themselves in. We have a partnership at the school here with Farm Credit Canada. Farm Credit Canada comes in, teaches the students how to write resumes and do interviews. Then students apply for jobs with Farm Credit Canada. Then they get to sit in on the interview. They do an interview with them, and they get to bring a support person in with them, and they go through the interview process. Once hired, they go to work at Farm Credit Canada for the summer. This year, this is their third year doing it. They have 17 students that they're giving full-time, very well-paying jobs to this summer. And that experience is the best for students. Their resumes get boosted. They get trained in all kinds of things like agriculture, business, leadership, workplace conduct. They're also have a number of barriers removed, like they're getting free food, bus passes, access to business clothes. And they build really strong relationships with their mentors at the corporation. So these types of programs, like the IAP program and the Farm Credit Canada program, these are the things that come in and they help students see themselves in a life beyond the walls of the school that they're in, and give them sort of that future path that they kind of need in order to want to keep coming, right? If you're coming to school and you don't see a reason for it, you're probably not going to come very much. Right? If you see where it leads, then you might be more willing to engage. Yeah.
To just further note of that, so you guys, because some of the people listening might not know, we are at the Mama Wayataton Center, and we are a school, but our facility is a partnership. It is an all-in-one building. We have Scott Collegiate that's upstairs, but downstairs at the low part is the Mama Wayataton, and that center, we collaborate with Regina Public Library, with the city, with the police services, and we have many different resources that we are trying to cultivate and grow for our students. So our students, they coming here for our education and stuff, but they are also networking with other people in the community. And when the people, like, for example, we talked about FCC comes into our building and has created those relationships, which has helped our students feel comfortable with them and going through the.
Did we lose our panelist?
I think we lost him.
Okay. We'll have Ceane come back to us.
New relationships for our students.
Thank you. Mr. Martin and Ceane and Jori, you spoke of a sense of urgency. This isn't something that is to be taken lightly, nor should it ever be taken lightly, but there is a sense of urgency here given the population needs, changes, growth, etc. And I've got a couple of questions here that probably tie into, Mr. Martin, some of your program opportunities. So here's one question that I'm reading out of the chat. Increasingly, we're seeing organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation invest in randomized controlled trials. And these are powerful tools to find out what works and has the biggest impact. Is there the potential for this kind of randomized evaluation of the entrepreneurship program? And maybe I can put it another way, your entrepreneurship program that you offer, how do we measure its success, or how do we measure its impact, or know that there is a positive impact with it? I know there is, but maybe Mr. Martin, if you could speak to that a little bit. Is there a potential for this kind of randomized evaluation of the entrepreneurship program?
Well, the entrepreneurship program is, first of all, very heavily tied to business education. And you can't really talk about one without the other, because it is the business education that is going to build for the future. And I'll have something to say on that later on at some point.
Okay.
The need to invest in the future. But in terms of the programs themselves, they're going over very well. The fact of the matter is that, I mean, you talked about there's no need to panic, but there certainly is a right to need to act. And I don't think that acting on any of these issues that we have talked about, whether they be, issues of mothers and child, whether they be the issues of early education, I think there's an enormous amount that has to be done. And I think I would just go there. I got to tell you what worries me is that a lot of this is regarded as, quote, social policy. And the implication of the social policy is, well, we're putting this money in to help these people, and let's get on with the rest of our lives. This is not social policy. This is education policy. This is investment in the future. And we have got to recognize that this is like, this is, I don't know when the heck free public schools was basically discovered 150 years ago or whatever the heck it happened. But at some point, when somebody came along and said, we're going to have free public schools, if people at that time had said, oh, well, okay, we've got to see if we can get a return on investment on free public schools, guess what? None of us would be here. I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at you, Chairman, and you don't look to me like you're and I've used this example before, you don't look to me like you were the son of British nobility. And I sure as heck know I was not. Yeah. And so if they hadn't had free public schools that my great grandfather got to go to, I wouldn't be here now. And that's what we're really talking about. We're talking about hard business decisions. How do you build a country? You build a country by making sure that no one is left behind. Certainly not the youngest and fastest growing segment of your population.
Right. So in terms of the programming that's available through the entrepreneurship program, I'm leading you a little bit in this one here. There was a question posed in the chat line here that says, going back to Ceane's comments earlier regarding representation, do we also need to think about training Indigenous educators to teach business skills to Indigenous students? And does that program provide such training for those educators?
Are you asking me?
Right.
I look at, would it be better if there were a lot more Indigenous educators teaching business? Absolutely, absolutely. But if they're not going to be there in sufficient numbers, then there's no reason why non-Indigenous teachers can't do this. But they have to recognize, I keep going back to this, they have to recognize what it is they're doing. And the other thing is, there's no reason why they can't do this together. This does not, this idea of the two tents doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense when you figure, who are we competing with? We're competing with the Chinese. We're competing with the Americans. We're competing with the Europeans, all of these people. And for heaven's sakes, we better understand that this country needs a partnership, and it doesn't need a partnership that's going to isolate us over there. And that really is the argument that if I was an Indigenous leader, that I would be making.
Thank you. Jory or Ceane, any additional comments at this time before I go to another question in the chat line?
Yeah, I come from a different worldview, obviously. By the way, I am Indigenous, and I was trained with the Aboriginal Youth Entrepreneurship Program, and I did teach it to the students here. And
Good.
Is it better? I don't really want to get into that conversation, but I was happy to learn those skills from the Martin Family Initiative training that I did, and to pass those on. That program is still offered here in the school as well. In regards to the sort of urgency that we talk about, I hear and understand the urgency that Mr. Martin's talking about, and I would agree as well. Unfortunately, in Indigenous communities, we sense a different type of urgency, and that is one that is life or death. Sorry, I get a bit emotional.
Yeah. Thank you.
The suicide rates among Indigenous people are very high. Sorry, I'm going to pull myself together here.
That's okay. Take your time.
So, in order to have excellent education for Indigenous people, you're actually saving lives. You're providing a place for those people to come. To engage in other areas of life that might bring more health and wellness to themselves and to their communities, including urban Indigenous people. I got it out. Thank you very much.
Could I ask Jory a question?
Please.
You were talking about suicide, and you're talking about young people. How much of that, the young people, we know that there has to be the family support and everything else, but how much of that at the present time is a young person sitting down, perhaps ready to go into high school, looking ahead saying, where is my opportunity? How am I going to succeed in life? And not having an answer. How much of that is behind some of the problems that you're describing?
I think that the not having an answer part is pretty much it, right? Like your inability to see beyond your pain. It creates sort of these blinders that are put on your eyes. And so you need assistance when you're in that space. You need mental health supports, you need friendly faces, you need someone to give you a sandwich because you're hungry. You need somebody to, and then just have a good, earnest conversation with you about how you're doing, you know? And that's where training teachers is so important, because if there's a teacher there who's only there to teach curriculum, and they have that student come in and that student is not welcomed in a safe and secure way, that could be the thing that tips that person over the edge, right? So there is a sense of urgency to the way that we train teachers, to the programs that we offer, and to the people that are in these one-on-one relationships with the students.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Good
Ceane?
stuff.
Yeah, that's again to echo as well. I can't stress more the importance that the relationship building is there. When we offer in our community schools, when we're offering a food, or like Jory said, a sandwich, a safe place, these are all pillars our students need in order to feel that they can be successful and ready to move on to that next step. And without those pillars first, it's hard to think about the future goals or where I'm going to next, when at the moment they are wanting, they're trying to figure out how they can get to school from one day to the next. So when we can provide, if we have the resources and the opportunities to provide students with these supports and build them up, and then from when we see them and when they are ready, they can continue to access their support within the same building, and start to see other to get other experiences, be ready even for other experiences. So being able to find and making that connection with their teacher who's running a leadership pathway, for example, and being able to see, work with them, develop a relationship and with somebody who understands what they bring with them when they walk into this building, and be able to support them, and not just with a hug, which is most important, but also with the push to say, how can we help you next? And here's some opportunities we can bring to you. Whether it's just work after school, you come to leadership, here's a relationship, and then you get to work with that person who you built that relationship after school, and you get job experience to put on a resume. So having someone who's trained in all aspects of that can help help with that student, but also understands where those individuals are coming from. That can only be brought in through relationships and relationship building. And if we can continue to focus on that, having someone like Jory said, having somebody come in that's just needs to teach the program is great, but being able to fulfill all aspects of that individual will create even more success in our students, our Indigenous students that are coming through programs such as those.
So thank you, Ceane, and thank you, Jory, for your authenticity. Thank you. And Mr. Martin there. So I have a question from the chat line here. A lot of our Indigenous peoples are being guided slowly. How can we fast track their education to be competitive in the marketplace? And Mr. Martin, you mentioned having business curriculum. Has there been a thought, to your knowledge, about creating something like an engineering school for Indigenous students?
I don't really know. Engineering, I'll give you an answer, but I give it not from a basis of knowledge. I give it, engineering is engineering.
Right.
And so, I mean, I don't think that you're going to teach a different engineering to young people who want to be engineers. They're going to, my point is really the opposite. And that is that in terms of basic studies, which is where I keep talking about, the economics, all of these fields, what has to be done is that we've got to stop talking about the cost of passing this on to high school students. We've got to develop as much as we can with high school students so that they can all of that, so that when they take engineering, they're not dealing with something that they haven't looked at at an earlier stage in their life. The problem that exists today is that we teach well and we give them whatever they get in high school, and then we leave them go.
Right.
We leave them go, and that doesn't make any sense at all. I actually spoke a couple of years ago at a university in the United States, which has the first year university. Is the whole adjustment is for Indigenous Americans, is the whole adjustment period. So that when they come to be talking about engineering, these kids are on exactly the same level as all the American, non-Indigenous Americans who are dealing with these things. I'm not saying that you've got to take things like engineering and adjust it. What you have to do is to adjust the more basic education. So when these kids go in to deal with it, they're on the same level as any other kid.
Thank you. So with Ceane and Jori, their perspective is very local. They have some provincial exposure as well to programming and meeting with others throughout the province. Mr. Martin, you have a perspective that's provincial and national in scope. So in order to support, move forward, enhance education programming and opportunities for our Indigenous students, we need people who are we need policy and we need people to make it happen. So how do we advocate for local or provincial or national movement to help provide an authentic, successful, and effective education system for our Indigenous students? So locally, provincially, and nationally, how do we move this policy development and support and make it happen for our students? Thoughts? How do we create the will?
You've been, you were talking earlier about panic and the urgency and this kind of thing. I think that you create the will with realism. Number one, the statement that Indigenous youth are the youngest and fastest growing segment of our population ought to wake a lot of people up, because ask yourself, what does that tell you about the world 10 years, or Canada 10 to 20 years from now? It tells you very clearly, you better hope that those people are very well educated, and that when governments complain about, oh my God, it's going to cost me a lot of money, this is federal governments or provincial governments. Well, yeah, of course it's going to cost you a lot of money. Anything that is an investment in the future that's going to work is going to cost you money. But I tell you, it's not going to cost you anywhere near what it would cost you if you don't do it. So I think that essentially you've got to really not talk about the world that exists today. You've got to talk about the world that exists in 10 years from now, 15 years and 20 years, and what it's going to be, and what do you have to do to make sure that that world works. And I think the second thing you have to do, and this goes really directly to your question, if you talk to people of my generation, not their generation of the three of you, my generation, what they will tell you is their absolute amazement at the world that has come out technically, where we are, all of the technologies that exist today, and you know, I mean, my office operates on the cloud constantly. I can't operate and get stuff out of the cloud. I'm lucky if I can spell cloud. That the fact of the matter is that the technology that is going on, the development of AI, when AI comes on, this is a whole new economy. And we've got to make sure that the people who are going to be leading the country when that in 10 years, the experts are going to be, they've got to be familiar, they're at home with this. And if they are, it's not necessary that I am at home with it, but I sure as heck want the young kid who today is in grade 9 in some high school is going to be capable of working in a world technologically which is so different than today is from what the world was like 20 years ago. And that's what we got to understand.
Thank you. Jory or Ceane?
Just on the thought of technology and advancing the education forward, I gotta say, I think historically, but definitely now, kids are far advanced than we are. Our students are already talking to the rest of the world in their free time. And so they advance themselves. And I think that a better question might be, how do we capture some of that, what they're already doing, and use it to the benefit of the education system generally. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, getting we're like here what we're doing at the moment. We're providing experiences for them because the technology race, I'll say, they see it, they are connecting, like Jory said, they are connecting with people, getting ideas. Those are their new books, and they are getting information so fast. And when we give them experiences here, the hands-on experience, and we can provide them, whether it's through like resume building, the jobs, the kitchen, the certificates, and all those things. As we provide those experiences, they are going to take what they're learning so much right now and connect the two and create their own thing. And like Jory said, hopefully we can find a way to harness that. And if we are a small part of helping them see that, how to work that together and where to direct it, that's going to be what will help them, I think.
Thank you. I have a question from the chat line here. Is there an opportunity, or are there resources for current guidance counselors or mentors within the high schools to follow the students into the first few years of their post-secondary education? Would you see this as being of benefit to those students? Maybe I could start with Ceane.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, well, one of the, like I talked about the advocacy program, that is one of the things we do. It is that transitions, right? Like at one point in Regina Public, we had a transition teacher position, and I was one of those. And we thought the importance of having students know somebody from grade 8 and going into high school. And I like that position as well, because it is, we all need that person, and that's that relationship. So now, as part of my role here, is I'm in contact with our graduates, some of our graduates all the time. And when we, not only do me and Jory, like counselors here, help with that, filling out that application and going through that process and celebrating their successes, but we also try to help them find individuals to build some of those relationships on campus or where they are going. And we always say to them, we're not gone. We're still here. Like Jory's always been at Scott, and we're still here, and we help that transition. But there could, like we said, there could always be more of us. One of the things that we struggle with is that I always say this, the hardest part about my job is that we can't get to everybody every day. And sometimes we are stretched thin. And so by having more people in the building to be able to help that will help our students a lot. So now that there's programs that are starting to develop in the university and in some of those other that can help bridge those the two communities as well, that transition is even more important than ever. We're seeing, I mean, a lot of the students that we see, I don't know the exact statistics, but I know that first year of university is hard. And if you are having trouble, can't make a relationship with a person in that building to help you and so forth, the dropout is pretty high. And so us helping them transition through there is great. But we're not in that other building. And when we can provide that in high school, and we're starting to do that, and it's getting better, but we also are looking to see that grow in other institutions. And that's what really, again, it goes back to that relationship building.
Could I ask you a question? Are you allowed to follow your high school students as they go on to university?
Yeah, it's that relationship piece, that communication. They know we have students that we have students that come and ask, like, I need help with my resume. I need help with this. Where do I start from here? Who can I contact? If they decide they go to university, where do I start? And because we have been in their lives for the past maybe just 4 years, but like I said, I started as a kindergarten teacher. So some of those relationships are now walking into my high school. So I have seen them when they were 5 years old up to now when they're 18. So we become part of those staples in the community where, hey, I'll go ask Cachene, or I'll go ask Dusyk, and we will try to figure out, and then we try to help them follow through it. It isn't a barrier for us, but at the moment, right? But we know we can only go so far. Once they're in university and they're walking through those doors, I can't just leave my space here and go walk with them in the hallways there, right?
So
Okay.
thank you for the answer there. Sorry, Jory, I didn't know if you were going to offer something there. I didn't mean to cut you off. Okay. So when I look at your title, Ceane, you are an advocate, an Indigenous advocate within the school division. Mr. Martin is clearly an advocate for many, many years, and Jory, the same thing, whether you have the title or not. How can the rest of us on this session, how can we be more engaged and involved in being titled an advocate, or one to move so that we do have more education opportunities for our Indigenous students? How can we make that happen for those of us who are on the call right now?
I'll just go quickly, and I wasn't sure if somebody was going to speak. I would say figure out where your realm of power lies in your life. If it's in administration in some other capacity, where you work, corporation, individual businesses, whatever. So wherever your realm of power lies in that sense, and see if there's a way that you can either support or work directly with the high schools in your city or your community, specifically if there's any that are particularly Indigenous oriented. The other thing I was going to say is participate in local politics, in urban politics, get involved with your school board, go to the meetings, ask questions, and encourage growth in that area, I guess. That's what I thought. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr.
You've
Martin.
got to get governments to be prepared to pay more for education, post-secondary education. That's overwhelmingly important.
Yeah. How do we develop that, before we go on to Ceane, if you have some comment, how do we develop that political will to make a change?
Simply point out the reality that this is the youngest and the fastest growing segment of our population. We're a country of only 38 million people. And we're talking about not educating fundamentally. And we're not saying we're not going to educate them. We're just saying we aren't going to pay for it. And we're not going to succeed that way. So what you really got to do is to say, what's the world that my kids are going to live in? And then say to yourself, what happens if in fact Indigenous Canada, okay, has not been able to develop the skills that are required because of a failure to get education because of the cost? Ask that question.
Thank you. Ceane, anything you want to offer?
I think when we look at how we can
I think we have him frozen again. Okay. I thought he was taking a long pause there for a second.
is sorry, did I lose you?
There we go. You're fading in and
Okay,
out.
I'm back again. I'm sorry. We always talk about the importance of building that relationship within our community, and there's lots of experts, whether it's cultural or things within our people within our community that can come in and teach, and our students appreciate the authenticity those individuals can bring because they want the real world experience. That's what they're craving. They want to see. It's great to learn about some things, but they want that hands-on. Some of them, they want that to talk to that individual who is out there doing some of those things right now, which is why some of our partnerships that we have in the school, it is being successful because the kids can go and have, not only do they get the opportunity to work at a company, but go through the process, but they are talking with somebody who's right within the company and are coming to them. It isn't just them going out. Like we said, once high school goes, then we just let them go free. We are having people coming into our building and coming to them, not just waiting for our students to go, because some of our students, it's having that means transportation. There's other boundaries, and by coming to them and coming into our building, like some of our partnerships here already, they've removed that one big barrier where the student can walk down the hallway or sit in the classroom and that person comes right to their classroom, and that is the beginning of something great, right? I think that's cool.
Thank you. I have a question here. It's a leading question, and I'm going to read it from the chat line, and I believe that you will have some opinions on this one and some facts. Is there any research into the return on investment to help make the case for increased funding? Is there any research into the return on investment to make the case for increased funding? Anybody want to start with this one?
Well, it's not hard to make projections. I don't know if there's any detailed, in-depth research as the question, which is a good question, by the way, has just put, but there's no doubt it's not a difficult essay. I mean, it's the fact is, simply ask yourself, what happens if you don't have the teachers? What happens if you don't have the engineers? What happens if artificial intelligence basically changes entire economies and you don't have the mathematicians and the engineers to deal with it? I mean, there's an awful lot of guessing that goes into this further study, but it's not hard. And the fact is that there's not very much of it there. Is the problem that I'm trying to set out, is that we're talking about today, and we're not talking about tomorrow. But the fact is, those kids are going to live tomorrow.
Thank you. Ceane or Jori, anyone want to add to this at all? To your knowledge? On this one, I look and I say that you have been wonderful advocates and you continue to promote and challenge. I'm going to pick up on something that you mentioned, Jori, about attending meetings, provide insight, take up leadership positions. So when I look through our participant list here, we have a number of leaders within the education sector across the province. So what is incumbent, and Mr. Martin, you'll know this from your experience, but what is incumbent upon our respective leaders to start asking questions of, or to probe when they are considering their policy developments or their policy and resource allocations? What is it? What are the questions that should be asked by our respective leaders?
What Ceane had mentioned at the beginning, I think a lot is based on graduation rates. That's sort of the number that is used to decide whether or not we are successful or not in educating a student, all students, not just Indigenous students. And so generally the questions lead back to that. Are the graduation rates improving, et cetera, et cetera. And I know that the Ministry of Education is doing work. We are Following Their Voices School. Following Their Voices is a program that creates dialogue amongst teachers about pedagogy and their effectiveness in classrooms when teaching specifically Indigenous students. If you go on their website, Following Their Voices, they have their reports from the many past years that they've been doing it. We are a year one school, so we've been at it the longest. And you can go back and see sort of the effectiveness of some of the work that they've been doing with Following Their Voices. So I don't think that really answered your question, but I think graduation rates and asking that question is usually what leads to something beyond, into the more practical stuff there.
Thank you.
I think, you've asked a really important question, and I think I'm getting very repetitive, but the problem that exists in terms of Indigenous Canada is that so much of what Indigenous Canada wants to do sounds to people like it's social policy. And so that means it's spending, we've got to help people, but it's all charity. This is not charity. This is the investment in the future of our country, because we're talking about the youngest and the fastest growing segment of that population. And we've got to face up to that.
Thank you. Ceane, any comments?
Yeah, it's recognizing it as our students are going through and growing. There are so many things that supports that, as we kind of alluded to before, I said about like food and having some of those major pillars in order to continue to thrive and grow. When we can start supporting our students by providing experiences and opportunities for them that they otherwise might not see are there. Again, like Jory said, it comes down to those boundaries. Sometimes our students feel that there's a lot of boundaries. So going from elementary to high school to university, each step provides different challenges. And if we can find ways to help support, and it isn't just our Indigenous, it's everybody. There are supports out there, but sometimes our students feel, some of our Indigenous students may feel that not looking for them. And having individuals who provide those supports with the understanding is, again, I guess I'm sounding repetitive too, but it is so important. And I think as we are wanting to harness that and look at those, providing the students with that information and having people who can support and say, you can do this and we are here and this is how we can help, that will be the road that we can help them with, the journey, that how we can start helping them to move forward in that journey.
Thank you. I'm seeing we're nearing the end of our time, and our panelists have been wonderful in sharing their insights and giving examples and creating some sense of direction where we should go. Just like to offer, are there any concluding comments that either any one of our panelists would like to share before we take our leave? And maybe I'll start backwards. Ceane, is there anything you'd like to share before we take our leave? Final comments.
I want to say thank you for this conversation. I think it's always important. I have attended things with elders, or these types of conversations have been happening a lot as of late. And I appreciate going to them and hearing them, especially ones from our youth. And our youth are talking a lot about, like I said, wanting to see representation and be a part there. That is there. They're wanting to succeed and move forward, and they want to grow with our communities and where the directions are going. And I'm honored, like lucky. I feel lucky that I'm able to help talk a little bit about some of the things, and that we say there is a lot of successes that are happening. I don't want to dismiss those. There's a lot of good things that are happening. One of the things that I just want to say is that I'm hoping that there's even more. Like there's an opportunity to grow, and we see it. And I'm hoping that when we talk to things like this, that other people, it'll ignite other people to want to help contribute to some of that growth, and see some of the growth that is out there for our students.
Thank you, Ceane. Jori?
Yeah, I just thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about something. Clearly, I'm very passionate about it. And yeah, I appreciate that, Ceane. There are a lot of wins and successes that we see every day. Engaging with young people is just, I don't know. I might not be able to convince you, but it's really great. It's like the best thing in the entire world. I have a great job. And I would invite, if you are in the city of Regina and you want to figure out how you might get more involved or whatever, to call us here at Scott Collegiate and have a conversation with myself or Ceane, and we can see what we can do, how we can get you involved in the school here. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, before you give concluding comments, I just wanted to share, we did get a question come in here at the end that I'd like to share with you. And it's for you specifically. And it states, your passion for this has always been admired by those of us in education. How do we make governments aware of the crisis around these demographics and start acting?
Well, people like you have enormous credibility. And what it really is it requires people with that enormous credibility to use that credibility to basically put it out there. I mean, I want to make this my final comment. There is a view among many Canadians that Indigenous Canada costs us money, is a cost that we have to bear. And I think that what has to be said by people like you and by people who really understand this is that these are not social costs. These are costs in a successful economic future. That we are in a world, and we've seen it now in the last couple of years, quite an unfortunate world of massive competition, where there isn't a hell of a lot of, let me help you out. That's the world Canada faces. And we will not succeed in that world unless all of the next couple of generations is above the needs, is capable of taking that world on. And that is going to be an investment in education, in education determined in as wide a way as you possibly can. Because it's got to be an education is going to be able to anticipate the new technologies, has got to be able to anticipate the social problems that we face as a country. But we've got to give ourselves the next generation that is going to be able to take that on. And, we can talk about all kinds of other things, but fundamentally, the Indigenous young people are not a cost. They are a positive. They are a plus, because they are the ones that, along with other people, along with other young people, who are going to have to face up to that new world that's out there, and also who will have to basically take care of the rest of us. And there's only one way that's going to happen, is that we invest in them and their needs now, and we stop messing about.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. We've completed our session. We've come to the end. I'd like to thank our panelists today for their insights, authenticity, passion, and information. Jory Kashane, Ceane Dusyk, and the Honourable Paul Martin, for your time with us, your preparation for today's session, and for the ongoing legacy you will leave with the words that are still ringing in our minds. I'd like everyone, please join me in a round of applause for our speakers using Zoom's reaction option, if you would please, or shaking the hands. And I want to thank one and all for joining us today. I wish you a wonderful afternoon. And if you enjoyed this lecture, please keep an eye on our Johnson Shoyama events calendar, where upcoming events are also being promoted. Again, thank you, Jory, Ceane, and Mr. Martin, and everybody. Have a good afternoon and be an advocate.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.